Right now, if this is working at the moment, it's static. It will only display the title or the number of position, whatever that you write there. We need that to be a variable. Now, don't write this, but we need this to be a variable. We need this to change every time we've got a comic, and we need it to then do it for X number of rows. If up here I've said there are X number of rows, well, we need to have a way for it to make X number of rows. So what this is going to be is a loop. We're going to need to do something over and over. So let's see how we can see this easily. Okay, this I just had it tabbed over to kind of line up, but I'm going to bring it back. Doesn't matter. But okay, this is the line that we kind of have to do over and over. This is the line that creates a brand new row and puts a comic. We need to put multiple comics. We want to do this over and over. We have the ability in JavaScript and many languages to create a loop that happens over and over. One kind of loop that we have in JavaScript is known as the for loop, F-O-R. So we'll say for loop to loop X number of times and create X number of rows. The idea here is that if I've got 3 comics, I want this to loop 3 times. If I've got 30 comics, I want it to loop 30 times. We have a way to keep track of how many comics we have. I had it up here. If I can get it on the same screen, maybe not. But we have whatever dot length. Length is a way for us to keep track of how many comics do we have here. So we can make a loop saying loop this number of times because we have a way to check how many comics do we have. And that is not how you spell loop, maybe in another planet. So for parentheses, curly braces, break those curly braces, F-O-R, not F-U-R, F-O-U-R, for X number of times, basically. For 12 times, do this. For 50 times, do that. This is a way. This is also a type of conditional statement. On the condition that you have not reached the limit defined, do it again. So it's a conditional statement. For loop, we'll say conditional, just to be complete. We will have a condition that we're going to evaluate here. We're going to check something and then do something. The something is this line right here. Do this line 3 times, 30 times, 300 times. So move this line that created the row into the for loop. Either or, somehow move it. So use all of our advanced technology to do this. Put that between the curly braces. Yes, table is on the outside. We don't need to recreate the end of the table over and over. We only need to create a new row over and over.
Can I just put the curly brace on the other side?
However advanced way we know to put the row in the for, we can do it.
Did you cut that and paste it, or did you copy and paste that?
Cut and paste. If you copy, it'll create one dead row that never changes. So you need to cut it to make sure there's only one instance in the for loop.
Now that table is on the other side of the curly brace. You want that one, right?
Yes, we want that at the very end because we don't want the table ending to be recreated over and over, just the row. So the for loop is going to do X number of times. It has a very specific syntax if you haven't seen this before. We basically have a starting point, a limit point, and then how many, and then an incrementer. So this is still yelling at me here. There's something wrong here because yes, this is not fully complete yet. We will say var. We're going to create a variable at this point called I. It is very common to use I for index. I for index. We're going to start at the 0th position, the 0th time. We're going to start at 0 and go X number of times. And notice the syntax, very specific. We're going to create a variable at this moment, call it whatever. Set it equal to 0, end of statement. But wait a minute, not end of statement, because then we have to say, what's our limit? How far are we going to go? I as long as it's less than 7, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It would do it 8 times. I less than 3 would go 0, 1, 2, 3. It would do it 4 times. Right? So as long as 0 is less than 0 is less than 3. So 0, 1, 2, 3 is the maximum, so it does it 3 times. Okay, we're defining a limit. At the moment, I have like 8 comics. So this is the wrong number. We have a dynamic way for it to check how many possible comics we have. Data.length. Similar to what we had on the line above, but above we had success.rows.length. Well, when we passed the object success.rows into this function, we can refer to it as data. So this data has a length. Now that will know. Start at 0 and go to x. If I've got 3 comics, 0, 1, 2, 3. So it'll do it 3 times. End of statement. And then one more I++. And I'll write this in the notes. Well, the idea is, and then semicolon there. Well, not a semicolon. The idea is we've got this loop that will happen X number of times up to a maximum based on this index value. It'll create rows at a time. So now here, instead of saying 0, my 0th row, I'm going to say I. Okay, so it's not quite complete yet because it's giving me a little message. We'll see why in a moment. But the logic here is, okay, a for loop will start at some value, usually 0, start at the beginning. And it'll loop as long as whatever the criteria is here, as long as I is less than length. Right now my length of my array is 8. So the first loop, it'll start at 0. Is 0 less than 8? True or false? True. 0 is less than 8. So it'll do this. And then it'll add 1 to 0. It becomes a 1. So it loops. Is 1 less than 8? True or false? True. Okay, it'll do it again. It'll increment it. It becomes 2. Is 2 less than 8? Yes. Okay. Is 7 less than 8?
Yes.
Yes. One more time. Is 8 less than 8?
No.
No. 8 is equal to 8. 8 is not less than 8. So then the loop stops. And we did it 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We did it 7 times. That's what this is doing here. So start at some number and go until the length. And then once it equals or goes over, 7 is less than 8, but then 8 is not less than 8, it stops. It doesn't increment anymore, it stops, it finished. That's what this is saying here. So to write a little bit more notes, parameters, starting point. So usually it's var, almost always it's var equals I0. That's just tradition. You can name it whatever you want. You can call it increment, index, cat, whatever. You can start it at 1 if you want, if you know what you're doing. Usually we're starting at the 0th position. And we've got condition. What are we testing for it to loop over and over? I'm not going to say oftentimes, but one common thing is I less than max. What's our maximum value that we're getting to? In our case, the maximum is based on length. We could hard code it to say I less than 12, and it will always be that number of times, 12 times. And then the last is the increment. oops, increment I plus plus. That just means add 1. Increment can be done in different ways. It's 99% of the time just like that. Increment or decrement by 1. Loop it one time, then another, and then another. Just add 1 because we're trying to reach the maximum.
Can you explain the last line one more time? Or I plus plus?
This is another way of writing I is equal to I plus 1. Let me write it on the same line up here. These are equivalent. This is a shorthand. We're starting at 0, and we need to loop to 1 to do it again, and then to 2, and then to 3. So a common shorthand is whatever plus plus will automatically add 1, which is equivalent to as if I had said I is equal to I plus 1. That's where the great joke of the programming language C++ comes from, because it came from the programming language C. And then they made the new version, which is an increment, C++, the next version. Now we know.
Notepad plus 2.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we have plain old Notepad. Here's the next level of Notepad, Notepad++. So this is just going to add 1 so that our loop keeps going. So eventually we get to 8 is less than 8. Nope. Stop. Proceed. Finish the table. Draw the table. This is going to do a loop for, 3 times, 10 times, whatever, to draw a row, draw a row, draw a row, and then table. Okay, that's the logic of it. Now, the code isn't fully complete because it's complaining here. JS expression expected. Because what happened is we kind of shoehorned in a loop in between our string. We started to create a simple string, but then we threw in a loop, and then we're continuing the string. So we need to fix up our code just a little bit. The previous line at the top over here, we started to build the first row, and then we say let's add more to it, but it won't work in this case because suddenly I have another command here. The concatenation works basically when you're building together a string, but then suddenly I'm putting more JavaScript commands, so it breaks. So at the end of our row up here, let's remove that plus and add a semicolon. We created a variable, we started to build the table, we started to build a row, then we stopped, so that then we can have this digression of a loop. This loop is going to add more to the string that we created previously. So here we will at the front say str string plus equals. It's very, very important to have a plus equals here. This is concatenation plus assignment. Normally if we have, don't write this, but normally if we have string equals cat, don't write this. But what this would be saying is take whatever is in this variable, dump it out, and replace it with this. We don't want that. We want to add to it. Take whatever is currently in the variable and add to it one more row. And loop it to add row 2. And loop it to add row 3. So a single equals is assignment. We're basically taking the thing on the right and putting it into the thing on the left by throwing out what was originally there. That's how that always worked. I never said it explicitly, but now it matters. Now it matters that we don't throw out what was previously there, row 1 and 2. Now row 3, we want to add to what's already there. And then that line also needs an end of statement up here because this plus, we're not building the string the same way. So at the end of that, inside of the for loop, at the end where we've got the icon, take away the plus and add end of statement. Let me show it this way maybe. So I can't show it all at once, but when I first created the table, I stopped. And then let's do a loop. And every time I loop, make a new row, and then end of statement. And then finally end the table. Well, let's add the final part of that string, plus equals. Take what's previously there and add to it. Again, be very careful that it's not an equals. That will dump out everything that was previously there and only end the table, which will be totally broken code. We want a plus equals. Take what was previously there, that loop that did its thing, and then add the final closing table, and then write the table on screen. So, we've done a lot of complex things here. We have now a variable. Instead of always being position 0, it's going to vary. It's going to start at 0, because we said start at 0. So the first time around, give me the title of the 0th comic. Is 0 less than 0? Yes. So I++, it loops back. That becomes a 1. Is 1 less than 0? 1 passes into here. Data 1. So the second comic. Is 1 less than 8? Yes. Add another. 3. Or 2. So then we get to 3 less than 8. So then that number gets put in there, and it loops and loops and loops. When it gets to 8 is not less than 8, it stops, it breaks the loop, and it proceeds here. It finishes the table. Question?
Where's the 8 coming?
The 8? I'm just choosing the number 8 randomly because I have 8 comics saved.
Okay.
But data.length, whatever your number of comics, right, we had up here, there are X number of comics.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to make sure I was missing something.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you put an 8 in there somewhere?
Nope, 8 is how many comics you saved. If you've saved 8 comics, you've got 8 comics. I'm just saying a number. I should say it.
6, then we get 6.
Exactly. And I think that gets it. There are no messages complaining, and the logic of it seems okay. Let me look at my error list just in case, because that one is a little complex. Nothing seems to be in the errors. Okay, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to run it. Remember, at the moment, you have to save a comic first to see any of your comics. We will program it, of course, that it will know automatically. If I go directly to view, it doesn't work because I haven't saved a comic yet. None of that works until I save a comic. I'm going to save one more comic. Wonder Woman, number 1, 2016, DC, issue number 1 again. Save that. That gets all of that. That gets all the ball rolling. Succeeded in saving a comic. We're running the prep. We're retrieving comics. In my case, 10 comics. There are 10 comics. Then it's going to run the function to make the table. Hopefully, then it'll loop 10 times. And then when I view my comics, 10 comics. So that was the very first one. Alphabetically, the very first one that I wrote today was amazing. Which one did I write? Spider-Man. I wrote Spider-Man number 1, but it's alphabetical, like I'm retrieving it, like I'm telling it to retrieve. I could retrieve it sequentially. I could retrieve it within a range. We'll talk about that later. But right now, we should have the rows. In my case, 10 comics. It looped 10 times. It's dynamic. I'm going to add one more comic. Wonder Man number 1. 1992 from Marvel. Save that. Okay, saved a comic. Down here it's telling me now I have 11 comics. It's rerunning the table function again. When I go to view, it dynamically then shows me my new row of comics.
Some of mine are undefined.
That might have been because as we built the code little by little, you might have missed something early on. If you're writing it right now, if you save one right now, and if it's still undefined, okay, we'll have to fix that. But if it was from something, from half an hour ago, I wouldn't worry about that.
No.
Is it happening right now? Okay, let's check your code a moment. So the idea here is we've got this looping. We're using the I value to increment and loop.
Can you go over the line 533 one more time?
533? So up here we created a variable that will hold our table. And we started the very first row. Then we've got code to make the rows in between. We're adding to the original string. So then we have to end the table. If we started the table and we made one row, and then we made X rows, well, then we have to eventually end the table. So that just ends the table. There's the bread of the sandwich. There's the lettuce in between. So in between it's got a table. And then at the very end, write that string into the div. Okay, so for our notes here, let's see, we'll say variable to build a string of HTML to display on screen. We'll say note. We start the table and the first row here, then do a for loop and add to the string, then we close the table, we start the string, we add to the string one row at a time, and then we add to the string to close the table. Okay, so I'm starting to display 11 comics in my case. You may have more or less, but it should start to display your comics. We saw that there is a little icon. You press the icon next to a particular comic, and it should then pop up. We need to program the pop-up to then display all of the info of the comic. So we have an icon that appears at the end of each row, right? There's a row with the title, the number, and then the icon. In order for us to, okay, for the user it'll be seamless. They will press an icon and it'll pop up for Superman number 1. They press another icon, it pops up to Wonder Woman number 1. It'll, for the user, will be seamless. They'll get what they need. We need to set it up, however, a way to keep track of which particular comic we've clicked on, because every row has the same icon right here. Every row has the same icon. Every row has the same class. So we need a class so that we can write some JavaScript so that when we press the button, it'll do something. But it needs to do a different thing for every row because every row has a different comic. So we're going to embed the underscore ID of each entry in the database for a particular comic. On screen, we're displaying the title and the number, issue number of a comic. But the way that internally every comic is separated in the database is by underscore ID. So we can also attach that data to our project here, our app, but not in a way that the user needs to see it. It'll just be internal. We're going to say that this particular row per comic automatically has embedded a particular ID. So let's back up to our for loop where we add to the string. We're going to add an attribute to the TR, the table row. Data-ID equals single quotes. When was the last time we worked with anything data-something? Anyone remember?
CSS?
Data-something.
JSON?
No. Maybe data dash role. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah.
Okay, so we had data role in jQuery Mobile. We had data data button equals true. What else did we have? Data dash icon. Okay, so we had the data attribute dash something. So if we had data role, maybe this is familiar, don't write this. Data role equals a section. Okay, so data dash whatever is an HTML5 attribute that we can invent, data dash cat. And then we can define, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to be a cat, besides knowing how to purr? So we're going to make up our own data dash ID. Then we need to define, well, okay, what does that mean? What does it do? We're adding an attribute that we're inventing, data dash ID. And inside of it is going to be the underscore ID of this particular comic. So every row is going to have the internal ID, the internal identifier of a particular comic. So that later, when I press the icon to show me all of the info for Superman #1, it knows to retrieve from the database, Superman 193901. It knows to retrieve a certain entry from the database, because all of the entries in the database are discernible via their ID. This is incomplete, of course. This is related to this. There's a title property, a number property, a year property, an ID property. So it's data of the ith index _. We're still using the for loop from above to iterate, to loop over and over. Give me the ID of the 0th comic, the first time it loops. Give me the ID of the 99th comic, the 100th time that it loops. And it'll embed it in our row as a data attribute that the user will never see, but is very important for us so that we can know which comic we're talking about. But this has got to be dynamic, just like this is dynamic. What am I getting at? Yeah, it's a mixture of HTML, JavaScript, and we've got to end the quotes and blah, blah, blah. So
Within that HTML, we have to do it again.
we have to do it again here to end the HTML, continue the JavaScript, continue the HTML. So this is why I wrote it out completely here first, because this is where we're going to get confused about single quotes, because we have to do ending the string, continuing the JavaScript, continuing the HTML. And then we see these like, what's this? Why is that floating there? No, we wrote it properly a moment ago, and we saw the logic of it, that when I end the string so that we continue to add to this string, we're going to continue to add to it. We're going to start to build a row with a data dash attribute of something. The something happens dynamically. Give me the ID of the current document, whatever it is, and then continue the code. And that looks weird, but it's not weird when I took away the quotes and stuff. And so then it continues the code for the doc.title, and then it continues the code of HTML, then it continues the number. It's going to be internal. The user will not see it. We can see it in the console. But here we're setting up, we're going to attach. This table row will have a data dash ID of SUP193901. The next one will have TR, a data attribute of spider 19922, whatever. It'll all have their own internal IDs embedded in the row, so that eventually when we display the full info, it pops up properly. Just to show you what that looks like once you run it, I'm going to save another comic. Save that. View that. I have a brand new comic, BB, right there. If I go to the console, well, the developers panel, it's not going to be in the console. I never put any console output. It's going to be in the HTML viewer here. If you poke around in your HTML code here, you will see somewhere here, wherever it's supposed to appear, I'll find it in a moment. But wherever it is in the HTML, it should then show all of those rows and all of those IDs, which will be, let's see,
It's gonna be on the bottom, right? Because it's the view column.
it's going to be in their View Comics. Yep, let me orient myself. Here we go, View Comics. I open up the section of View Comics, and then inside of the article, all of this is happening in the main area, not the header, not the footer. I open that up. Inside of that, there's a div that we wrote where everything is falling into. Once I open that div, I see a table that I created dynamically, and then I open that, and then I start to see, okay, one more thing. Then I open that, and I start to see my rows of data, my heading row, and then each individual row, data ID dash whatever, whatever, whatever. If I then open one of those rows, if I'm, fully curious in there, then in there I have a cell with that title, a cell with the number, and a cell with the icon and the class. So this will be clickable, and then we have a uniquely identified row because we dynamically wrote the data dash ID coming from doc._ID. Question?
I'm looking at it, and my data ID is all of them saying undefined.
Yep, so check that you've got the right _ID, not just ID, it's _ID. Okay, so if you see it up there, and we've got all of these, this is very good. That's all dynamically written. Originally, it wasn't there. There was nothing there about there was no unique identifier before, but now with this, we're attaching a data dash attribute, a data ID attribute, and then we're filling it with the _ID of the document of the I value. Okay, so we're moving along well in terms of we've spent this time to save comics. That's code we've looked at before. We were saving data to the database. We started to then work with pulling data out of the database. But it's not just about collecting the data. We have to do something with it. We're displaying it on screen. Ultimately, it is this right here. Let's write some HTML on screen. Well, we have to do a fun thing. I think it's fun. I don't know if you do, but this loop I think is fun. It then loops over and over, and it does something over and over. It builds a new row over and over. It puts the title, the ID. It's embedding the ID internally. Well, obviously, we will eventually style it in terms of the table. Maybe I want to center it. Maybe I want to do things. That'll be the CSS's job, which we'll do later. But we're also going to do something eventually called zebra striping, which is a common design practice of alternating colors. This is, it's going to get a little hard to read when it's just kind of like rows of data. But if we alternate a color, one row is one color, one's another, and then it's a little easier to read. Okay, that's cosmetic. We'll do that later. More importantly, I want the functionality of when I press the icon right here of Amazing Spider-Man, I want to pop up to show me all of the fields of Amazing Spider-Man. Let's move on to making that functionality happen. We want those icons to be clickable so that it will open a particular comic in question. We started to build we started to build that functionality in by adding a class to the cell where that icon is at. So when we click on the icon, do something. We're going to run into an issue here because this is dynamic. This class doesn't exist at runtime. That means when I run the app for the first time, or every time that is, that cell and that class does not exist because we've got to first save a comic in order for that cell to appear. Then the class exists. So we can't create just yet an object for it. We have to do a little bit of a roundabout way. But this also gets to the issue of if I start my app right now without saving a comic, I don't want to have to save a comic to view my comics. I want to view my comics. So let's program first that we get comics when we launch the app, so that we don't have to manually save a comic. That means we need to put in the function showComics table in more than one place so that it does what it needs to. One place will be near the beginning where we have our if-else statement. Let's go to the beginning of our code where we've got our who is logged in checker. If a person has created an account, most likely they've saved a comic. We'll deal with the what if they didn't save a comic in a moment. But if they've created an account, they've probably saved a comic. So here it's checking. Is anyone logged in? No, don't do anything. Is someone logged in? Yes, move them to PG Home. Well, they probably also have saved comics. So remember initialize displaying comics for the current user. So we gave ourselves a note there. Initialize the database for the current user. We did that. Initialize displaying comics. Remember to set the user's email. Okay, we did that. So after our note here, initialize displaying comics for the current user. We're going to call the function that begins the process of displaying the comics on screen. Function showComicsPrep. Remember, that's the main function we call to get the ball rolling, to get the comics from the database, prepare them, then pass them to the function that makes the table to display it on screen. So this is the one that we call whenever we want to refresh the table. We've programmed it so that if there are no comics in to display, it'll display the message instead. There are no comics. So that's not a problem if there's no comics. We have dealt with it. But if there are comics, it will start to display the table. This assumes a person has previously logged in. Well, if they created the account for the first time, they're going to log in for the first time. We need to add that as well to our login function, because you're going to get to PG Home a couple of ways. One automatically, if you've previously made an account, and there's the automatic part, and one manually, if you're going to log in. So let's go to our function login, and we're also going to plug in that prep comics. So let's go find function login, fn login, wherever that's at. I'm doing a search to find it a little faster. In my case, line 164 or so. Okay, I might manually log in, especially the first time, or if I've logged out. In this function, to log in, it's got that whole rigmarole about checking, do they exist, do the passwords match, when all of that matches. If you also did the extra credit about check for a strong password, after all of that gets satisfied, we have a level inside of here to move us to home. Mine is 203 or so. we should have the level eventually where we have move from the current container changes to home. We've initialized the database for a person, move us home. After we initialize the database, we never wrote the comment, I guess. After we initialize the database, we have comics to display. So after that, we have let's show the table, and then after that, let's move us to home. So maybe we'll just write a note right over here. Then show users comics, if any, which is function show comics prep. So all of this is about, do the user exist, do the passwords match? Okay, yes, all of that checks out. Prepare their database, show their comics, move them to home. Now we should have the functionality that as soon as you launch the app, you can go to view comics and there will be something. We didn't have that before. We were only showing comics when we saved a comic. But now we've added it to the two other places that's relevant, when the app auto-loads at the beginning if else, or when they log in. And like I said, if they don't have comics, we programmed it to say you don't have comics. I believe those are the only necessary. Actually, one more place. No, wait. Okay, we haven't gotten to that yet. When we delete comics, individual comics. Oh, wait a minute, that's a good point. When we delete all the comics, we have one more place to refresh the table. When we delete all the comics, let's do that, then we'll test it. Let's go to our delete all comics function. What did we call it? Delete collection. Delete collection. Yep, let's go find delete collection. Function delete collection. That's another place. Okay, we would have found it in a moment, but we would have, as we were testing it, you would say, what if I delete my comics? You deleted your comics, you go to view comics, they're still there. No, they're deleted in the database, but we never refreshed the table, so it looks like they're there, but we deleted the database, we confirmed that via testing other days. But there's the back end and the front end, right? Behind the scenes, we deleted the database. But we also have to deal with it in the front end for the user. We had to refresh the table. There's no more comics. So under delete collection, after we've asked them once and they've confirmed, after we've asked them twice and they've confirmed, we finally have destroy. If we succeeded in destroying the collection, we have a message to ourselves, a pop-up message to them, reinitialize the database, refresh the screen. We refresh the screen with function prep comics. So now show an empty, not an empty table. Remember, we wrote a message that says if the table is empty, it'll write a message. If there are comics, it will show the table. Prep comics is the one, yep, because it first has to grab the data from the database, which is nothing. Then it has to prepare to either show an empty table or the message that there's nothing. Those should be the three places. There's one more once we delete individual comics, which we're not there yet. But now let's try this out. If you save it and run it, you can go directly to view comics. There are comics to see. If I log out, so I was logged in as V. If I log out and create a brand new account, this is the part about testing. I'm guiding you right now, but hopefully you're thinking, what if I do this? What if I do that? What if I do the functionality that previously worked? Does it still work as it's supposed to? I'm going to create x@x.com. As a branded user, have not created them before. I'm going to log in. x@x.com. View comics. No comics yet. Save some. So there was that. We created function prep comics to look in the database. If rows is equal to undefined, there's no comics, write that message. Or else, rows is equal to something, proceed drawing the table. That's happening right here.
Did you say that yours is to display more than 8?
Yeah, I've saved more than 8 comics. We're going to do help in a moment, but no, when you save more comics, it should show more of your comics. We'll check that in a moment.
So the user that doesn't have anything in the database, under my collection, it says no comics yet, saves out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm showing here. So for a brand new user, which I just logged in as, it's going to prep comics. It's going to look, okay, go get the comics. If there are no comics, say this message. Or else there must be comics, proceed with drawing the table. So with a brand new user, there's no comics, so we say that message. I think that message is slightly different than what I wrote in the HTML, but just a message that says there's no comics yet. Or an image, you know, where we can write HTML here. So what if I have an image tag, which I won't do here, but if I put an image here, no comics.jpg, that's HTML. I can write HTML. It doesn't have to just be a sentence. Within this if of no comics, well, what if I look up, what was it, navigator.notification.beep? What if I make it beep, navigator.beep 7 times, whatever it was. Navigator.notification. Yeah, whatever it was. So the point here is we've built these basic pieces, and we're doing something simple in terms of, say, a message. But once I know all of these other pieces, what if I put them together? What if I make a pop-up instead of just a message? What if I put an image? What if I make it beep or play a sound? The thing about any of these programming languages is that it's not that you have to memorize 200 codes. You have to look up and learn and memorize enough of them to make it do something, and then you look up, well, I also want to do this and I want to do that, and I look it up and I put these pieces together. I know how to make a random number. What can I do with that? I know how to write HTML via JavaScript. Well, what can I do with that? I know how to use a Cordova plugin to make a sound. Well, what can I do with it? So I just demonstrated there with a brand new user that has no comics. Well, there's no comics. If I save a comic, Bat Dog number 1, it's not a thing, but we'll say sure. Save that view. And we have a brand new comic there. So it's dynamic. It does what it needs to. Let's take our second break just to confirm it all works. When we come back, well, we'll deal with pressing a button to show details. I've written all of these details per comic. I want to see them. Better yet, I want to edit them or delete individual comics. It's 8:20. We'll be back at 8:30. And let me put my latest code into the folder. We'll do a little help.